If I can have you just grab maybe a couple last bites, we're going to get the program going. Because I know you are all off to the next event at the library this evening. Thank you very much for coming tonight. My name is Evelyn Benson, and I participate on the Jackson Housing Opportunity Matters subcommittee. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, as well as those of you who came in June. We sort of kicked off the effort with the community outreach at that point, and then we spent the summer months doing some small group outreach to different stakeholders, and then some individual interviews with folks. So this is a culmination of the work that's been going on. We'll share with you some of the different ideas, both regulatory approaches to our housing challenges here, as well as non-regulatory approaches. Before we get right into the program, I just want to thank you to the big thanks to the Whitney Committee for funding the child care and the food, most of which is actually donated by J-Town Deli, Red Fox, Thompson House Eatery, and the Christmas Farm Inn. Is there anyone else on this? I donate chili. But anyways, just again, thank you to our businesses, always very generous. I just thought I'd introduce some of the members of the committee that are here tonight. The co-chairs, Betsy Harding and Scott Badger. Let's see, Sarah Duffy. I think that's Carpentario. Tish. There's Tish. Bob Kantak, Bob Thompson, Dick Badger, Gail Doctor, Jim Wasco, Kevin Bennett, Margaret Graziano, Roger Aubrey. I think that's everybody, right? So tonight, just one more thing. We do have a sign-in sheet right over there. Before you leave tonight, if you could just sign in, there are 3 columns at the end: home share, housing trust, and regulations, meaning regulatory options. If you could just sort of indicate what ones are of great interest to you, in terms of calling back and keeping you in the loop on those different efforts, that would be great. So here's the schedule for the evening. We're going to do an overview of the project, results of Jackson Housing Study, and then a discussion of the housing initiative and next steps. So I think that is my part of the program.
You can keep going.
No! It would be very short bullet points. So this is Steve Whitman from Resilience Planning, and Liz Kelly right here. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So good evening, everybody. Let me know if at any point I want to stay in Marianne's way, probably most of the time. But I'll kind of so we have a 3-part session tonight. It's a little bit different than the June forum, if you were here back in June, which was much more interactive. Now we're really more reporting out to you, and then we want to have some discussion about the findings of the committee. So, jumping right in, giving an overview of the project. Knowing that some people might be joining us for the first time, we wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of what we did as part of this housing study and what some of the major findings were. Some of these things will be things that you're already quite familiar with, having lived here. The housing study was made possible by a grant from Plan New Hampshire, as well as funding that was raised here within the town of Jackson, and that's also important to point out. And the plan was to have it wrapped up by the end of 2018, and we're on track to do that. We came on last winter to assist the community with the Jackson Housing Committee, as well as the planning board. So what did we learn? As you probably know, Jackson is unusual as a community here in New Hampshire, where so much of the land mass actually falls within the national forest, unavailable to development. And so this is a graphic that Liz put together when we were first trying to get a handle on what's happening in Jackson from a land use perspective, as we looked at the master plan and your land use regulations and all of that. But just spatially, the fact that you have about 25% of the community, where the majority of your development takes place, and that within that small 25%, you also have constraints to development. There are still steep slopes, and there are water bodies, and there are roadways, and other infrastructure in those areas. This highlights some of the challenges here in Jackson for not just housing, but for other things. But it definitely gives us a constraint as far as looking at potential future housing locations. Fortunately for you, you have a relatively up-to-date master plan, which has looked at this issue. You have a 2014 build-out study, which has also looked at this particular issue. So let's look at the housing and population characteristics of Jackson. This is a poster. We'll jump into some of the specifics. I don't expect you to read this from where you are. This is one of the posters that we shared back in June, which was to create a snapshot of what we know about the demographics and the housing within the community. It probably won't surprise you too much, but it's good to actually have some specific data. So here are some things we want to highlight. You're older. You're in a state that's older, but as a community, you're an older community. That's shocking, right? But that contributes to some of the unique aspects of housing-related issues here in Jackson. You're wealthy as a community. That's not everybody, but as your median household income is fairly high, both for New Hampshire and for the county. And having been a community that's seen different waves of seasonal housing construction, it was interesting in the master plan to read that history of how second homes, weekend homes, seasonal homes were created in these different waves, from A-frames to the condominiums to single-family homes. But this is one of the infographics that Liz put together to look at total number of housing units here, and it's this 529 seasonal or vacant, a really big number. There are other vacation-oriented or tourism-oriented communities, whether they be mountain or lake-oriented in New Hampshire, that have a similar 50-50 split that you do. But then within the occupied units, the 461, these are U.S. Census numbers, you see there's a fairly high number that are actually over-occupied, and then there are some that are open to renters. And so this was kind of our first look at your housing numbers. Over the time that we've been working here, we've learned that quite a few of these seasonal units and some other rental units have transitioned to being short-term rentals. So you'll hear that was one of the issues we spent a lot of time talking about. It came up at the forum back in June as well. And the third thing to make as a note from the committee, working on the committee, within Jackson, mortgages and rents are substantially higher than the averages we found in the county. So it was one thing to look at the U.S. Census data and to bring it to the committee and think that we had kind of figured something out, and then Scott and Betsy and others from the committee would provide other local data, which gave us an even clearer image of what's going on. The available units is virtually non-existent as well. Yes?
So can you help us benchmark that 96 non-seasonal units rent or occupied? Can you benchmark that against some of the other resort area? How does that look?
I can't cite them specifically, but just we're working with Wolfboro right now, and have worked with Newbury in the past.
What's your sense?
For Newbury, this would be high. This would be a lot of renter occupied units.
So the availability of renter occupied units is higher here.
And this is just from my recollection, so don't hold me to it. But for Newbury, it would be, but they have a different community in other ways. In Wolfboro, I'm not sure. We have to look at that.
And Steve, I think it's important for us to recognize that many of those renter units now, or even the ones that are listed as owner occupied, are now very often marketed only as VRBOs or Airbnbs or something like that. So it's not necessarily for a long-term tenancy.
This is 2010 census.
It's updated. They'll do projections through 2016. So they kind of follow.
Free VRBO. Anybody have any sense on how many of those renter occupied are short-term?
We'll get to that. No. And it's an estimate, but we did look at that. So Available housing units is one thing. The fact that they really aren't available in the end, that there's basically a 0% occupancy rate, and you probably all have your own stories about people trying to find housing, whether it's to rent or to purchase. This was another issue that came up, just looking at the population trends for the school. Population in public schools is dropping in a number of communities in New Hampshire. And this was an issue when we were here at the forum. A lot of people talked about fear of losing the school and just what a school provides for a community, how it contributes to the community, how a mix of different people and at different ages and having families here, but also other aspects of having a school. So this was highlighted as an issue. And then looking at what you have according to the census for types of housing, you're primarily single-family detached homes. The vast majority are individual single-family homes. Some single-family attached, some duplexes, some multifamily housing. We could probably differ with the census on some of these as far as what you would call them, but at the end result is you're mostly single-family. And that's important because we asked a question in the survey about where people want to live. So after looking at the data that we could dig up from master plan, from the census, from other places, we started going out and talking with some of you, and some of you may have participated in each of these. Initially, we did stakeholder interviews. Liz came up here and spent a day with Scott and Betsy and others and talked with folks to get a sense of what they saw as opportunities or concerns related to housing. And I think in those conversations, we started to hear about short-term rentals. We started to hear specific stories people had about challenges finding housing or thinking for themselves about what they'd like in the future. And we started to hear that some people don't think that there's a housing issue, that it's okay and the market will sort itself out. So it's not, I don't want to give the illusion that everybody is on the same page here. We're a normal community. It exists. So stakeholder interviews were the first step. We drafted a survey and launched that in the spring and had the community forum. At the community forum in June, we provided some of the initial survey results, and I'm going to touch on some of the results from each of these now, just to give you a sense of what we heard. Okay, so the early interviews. We heard that it's an expensive community to live in. We heard that there's minimal or no affordable housing options for renters or for people that are just buying in to be new homeowners. Also for seniors looking to downsize, as well as young families and working professionals. There was a comment about mostly everyone who works in Jackson doesn't live in Jackson. Most people thought there were housing issues present in Jackson, and they thought there were far-reaching impacts to the economy, sense of community, and things like that. It was noted that seniors have few options to stay in Jackson when they become unable to live on their own, and you'll see how that informs some of the solutions going forward. That there are individuals who moved out of town due to high housing costs, individuals who've tried hard to find housing in Jackson but couldn't find anything. Airbnbs and short-term rentals started to come up in these interviews. And we noted at the time that there were 60. So this is back in the spring, that there were approximately 60. At the same time, where would you expand housing? And people noted some of the challenges to additional housing units were just a general NIMBYism, the National Forest land, which takes up so much of the land, available land being expensive, and building costs, construction labor rates being high, fairly low wages, negative perceptions of affordable housing. All right, question in the back first, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
I would just quantify the first bullet, where it is very expensive to purchase and or rent a home here.
Yes.
Once you're here, it's not very expensive to live here.
Yeah, this is specifically to units, yeah.
Because our taxes are extremely low and cost of living relative to the rest of the country, even a lot of New Hampshire is very low.
You totally hit it on the head. That's really the point.
To what extent does the fact that the labor pool that works here that doesn't live here, does it impact the supply of labor? I mean, if they have to walk to work, there's no transportation, I can see that being a real issue.
Right.
But did you hear from local businesses, hotels, et cetera, that the fact that people can't move here has impacted their business because they can't meet demand for their existing businesses?
This is where I'll open it up to the committee members and Liz, go ahead. You want to share what you heard?
We heard that repeatedly during our interviews with area businesses. You know, Sue at the Snowflake was saying that she has her best worker lives in Brownfield. We were hearing that from Senator Ford at Christmas Run Inn. We were hearing that at ski touring. They have all of the area businesses have a lot of trouble finding staff willing to travel to here and keeping the staff, because once they're working here and are happy here, they can't find housing they can afford.
Even Mountain have said that they're having a single staff member, not only that lives in Jackson, but that they have a single staff member that lives in the valley. Everyone they employ north of the notch or across the line.
And since June, the big impact, if any of you constantly go to see the authorities at Jay Tundell, they had to curb their hours because they don't have help. So this is a business that they're trying to run and they just don't have help.
And the Eagle Mountain House owner, the general manager, was saying that there are times when they have to house some of their workers there because they know that they can't get through the notch or back through the notch in the morning. So it's very complicated for the businesses.
Good questions. Yeah, question over there.
But is that a Jackson problem? Because that's a problem on the coast of Maine. It's a pretty widespread problem. So I think you want to be careful of thinking it's because of the geographic position of Jackson, because this is a pretty regional problem. It's a country.
We can't
It's a
change what
country
happens on the coast of
correct.
Maine.
What's that?
We can't change what happens on the coast of Maine. We might be able to change what happens in Jackson.
Yeah, no, I'm just simply saying is that if you're looking for causes, you want to be careful of not grabbing the one that may be the wrong cause.
Yeah.
Yep. And really, this was these early parts of the study were just trying to get as much input as we could on what the existing conditions are, where there is a level of concern, where we're not concerned, what issues seem bigger than just Jackson, but maybe you still want to try to address. So the other thing we did was the survey, and I won't bore you with lots of survey results. The full report is available through the committee. But to me, and in some of our conversations, this was interesting. It wasn't a huge finding, but it showed that there was a need. So one of the questions we asked was, what kind of a unit do you live in now? And we had 119 people that participated in the survey. 72% of the respondents were year-round residents. 78% were property owners. 72% of the residents currently live in a single-family housing. So the majority lived in a single-family home. We asked where they want to be 10 years from now. The majority want to be in a single-family home, right? So it wasn't a huge surprise. But it was only 64% in this case from this small sample. And what it started to show us, there were some other types of housing that people were thinking about for themselves 10 years out. It could be senior housing, it could be an opportunity as the support to be able to age in place in their home, or in some cases they knew a family member was looking for affordable or workforce housing, or a smaller starter home or an accessory apartment. And some people figured that they might have to move from town in 10 years. And so it didn't mean that there was a wholesale change in what housing had to look like in Jackson, which was a bit of a relief, but it meant that there probably were a need for a few different types of units over a period of time. So not a huge scale to attack. A couple other things that were of interest. Let's see. 64% of the respondents indicated that high-priced homes for sale for young families is a major housing issue in Jackson. And maybe this gets to your point about once you're here, it's not an expensive place to live, but getting in can be challenging. Other housing issues that respondents identified as being prevalent included a lack of rental apartments, lack of available homes. 40% of the people just thought there was just a lack of places available for people to buy. High rental costs for apartments. But 16 people actually said there's no problem. So we want to recognize that that was a voice that was heard as well. Okay, so then we came to the forum in June. Some of you may be featured in this picture. Take a look at yourselves. The forum was intentionally interactive. We did something called the World's Cafe, where we had a series of tables set up with different themes and questions, and it allowed you to have really rich conversations. You don't need to hear from Steve and Liz. We need to hear from you. And people here in Jackson, we had over 60 people that participated and gave a tremendous amount of feedback. Some of the individuals that we heard from were worried that they won't be able to stay in Jackson in the future due to high housing costs. Others thought Jackson would not be a diverse demographically or socioeconomically if the housing challenges are not addressed. So that came across as a concern. Some worried that town services would suffer if the town is not able to attract younger working age individuals to occupy volunteer positions. Some thought the school might close. Others thought there'd be a loss of community spirit over time if the demographics aren't broad. That the aging demographic will move to assisted living facilities, which may further increase housing costs. And that communities might draw the young people, other communities might draw the young people away from town. This was the first opportunity, the first interaction I was at home sharing came up as a concept that was talked about. Home sharing, co-housing, developments in neighborhoods, tiny houses and cottages. A lot of things were discussed at this meeting, and that all informed the work of the committee over the summer.
Sorry, what's home sharing?
We'll get to that. You get a gold star. You know what's coming. That's like a racer. Did you black him? Most individuals also had conversations indicating that they would like to see the opportunity for accessory dwelling units or accessory dwelling unit apartments available. The idea of a clearinghouse or housing website that could pair renters and property owners up, kind of like a match service, dating service, for people who would be willing to live together, that came up as a theme. It was noted that housing is found by word of mouth in Jackson. And then lastly, we get a lot of feedback about community character. And that's something I heard a lot from the committee and the planning board. Any of the things that we're talking about tonight, please know that the conversations have all been, how can we do this in a way that doesn't disrupt the character of Jackson? It's not an effort by anybody to really shift the character of the community. So making decisions that are right in size and in the context of Jackson were really important. Okay. So,
Can I just follow up? In fact, really the effort to maintain the community we have is not let it become completely different community.
So we get a lot of input, we heard a lot of ideas, we come together with the J-Home Committee, and we started to brainstorm. We brainstormed a list of regulatory initiatives we could investigate, non-regulatory initiatives they were aware of or we found in other sources with the housing here in New Hampshire as well as in other states. And what we ended up creating over the summer that is available is an inventory and kind of a synopsis of all these, including examples and resources. And we used it as a working document to have conversations about, well, would this alternative be good in the community? So we looked at the possibility of regulating or banning short-term rentals. We looked at inclusionary zoning, which you have a provision in the ordinance already. We looked at higher density housing opportunities within the town. Development on non-conforming lots, which a couple of communities have done for affordable housing units. Limited development, looking at partnerships between conservation and the creation of housing units. Adaptive reuse of buildings. Form-based code, which is a different type of zoning. And missing middle housing, which is multi-family units that can fit in, that can look like a large single-family unit. It's one of the things that Plan New Hampshire is working on in other communities. We also looked at non-regulatory initiatives, local housing commissions, housing trusts, community land trusts, home sharing, co-housing, village-scale housing initiatives, donating land for the purpose of creating a specific kind of housing, and purchasing units for resale with restrictions. There are a lot of these maybe will have promise for people in the future. They're things you can revisit as a community. There were 3 that were identified by the committee for kind of initial investigation and pursuing that we're going to talk to you more about tonight. And so the 3 are changes to zoning. I just highlighted inclusionary zoning, but we talked about changes to 2 different areas of your existing zoning. The creation of a housing trust and home sharing. So those were 3 that were identified as priorities, and we're looking forward to telling you about them quickly and getting your feedback, involving you in the discussion. So, the first one, land use regulations. We identified 2 areas. So in the course of the housing study, we were analyzing the master plan from an outsider's perspective and asking lots of questions, analyzing the zoning and asking lots of questions. And when we came back around to looking at how to move forward on the regulatory side, we found 2 provisions in your existing regulations that we started to look at closer. One is your cluster single-family development, single-family and multifamily development. And the other is your existing affordable and workforce housing provision, section 11 of the zoning. My involvement early on was working with the committee, and especially with Scott and Betsy, to start to suggest places where we could change some of the standards, whether they be dimensional standards, or provide an incentive for somebody that's going to use either of those existing zoning tools and wants to specifically provide some housing solution here at Jackson. So I attended the first planning board work session, looked at these a little closer and kicked around some ideas. And since then, the planning board has continued to talk about how to handle some regulatory changes. So I invite Scott and or Betsy to share, but they're not going to read zoning changes to you. You have to indicate on the sign-up sheet that you want to be that level of detail. Yeah.
And first I'll say that our initial angle was to look at short-term rental. That seemed to be a place that we could have an immediate impact, if we could do something. We weren't really looking to eliminate it altogether, but to manage it, to come up with a way of managing it, to sort of balance the benefits that it does provide to the property owners and the community with the community as a whole. And unfortunately, or fortunately, from your perspective, there's really nothing that we as a town can do in that regard without some authority provided by the state. And so that's where we're at with that. So as Steve mentioned, we then turned to our zoning, looked at 2 areas that, as you mentioned, cluster development and the inclusionary zoning we already have. And sort of combining the 2 in a way that for cluster development, where we're headed is to probably reduce the amount of open space commonly required in cluster development if there's an affordable housing component. And then for both cluster and any other type of subdivision, even a single lot subdivision, we're looking at possibly reducing the amount of frontage that, say, that cluster development or that new single lot would require for affordable. So that's sort of where we're at the moment. We have a planning board meeting tomorrow night. That's the bulk of the meeting is going to be working on these amendments and the specifics and the language. Then we'll have at least 1, if not 2, public hearings after that. And I certainly encourage everybody to attend if you can, if you're interested.
Can you give us a sense of what that would do for that equivalent footprint? So how many more housing units does that be for a unit?
In terms of if we're...
How much more housing can you provide in a given plot?
Well, if it's cluster development, for example, if we said 50% common land, you need 25% common land. And how many units can go on any piece of land depends on, what kind of subdivision. But, say it's 10 acres on average, it requires 2 acres per unit, just to keep the math easy. So at the moment we're doing cluster development, you would need to have 50% of that land is common land, and then as many units as the entire parcel would hold. So 5 units, but 50% of the land being set aside as common land. So excuse me. Right. So it's 25% common land. It's still the same number of units based on the entire property, but the units can be spread out more traffic. And then if it's
So you can get another unit of housing. I don't know that that's what it sounds like.
well, the number of units is somewhat dependent on the entire size of the property.
Right.
If it's 10 acres.
So if not 10 acres,
will hold this many 2 acres. So really, if you can reduce the density of the units, it makes them more attractive to develop. It is in the current inclusionary zone, and maybe that's better specifics. You allow additional 1 out of 4 units is affordable.
To increase the density, to appeal to a developer.
yeah.
And then the frontage is a little more difficult. That just, in theory, less frontage means more dense, but you can have a property with 100 feet of frontage that's got 100 acres. We have some very oddly shaped properties here in Jackson.
When you're talking about affordable, is there a number that you have been using in order to define that or arrange what makes an affordable unit?
Right, well, we're basically working with the HUD numbers, the Housing and Urban Development numbers from the federal government, and if you had a family of 4, the maximum price you could ask is $211,000, something like that. But that's more than many people could afford. So we're looking for opportunities where housing units could be at a variety of costs. If somehow we're able to get a place where there would be 12 units built, let's say, then maybe we could have 3 different prices of 3 of the homes there, and then other prices of houses would be larger. And a good example might be, there are some complexes in town where you see some attached houses together, and there have been developments where, let's say you have a duplex here and a duplex there. It might be that in that duplex there are really 2 homes, where in the other one there might be 4 homes. They might look identical, but service different people in different ways. And cost less.
So one of the things I think that came up in our conversation, don't go too far, but was just that there haven't been a lot of units constructed. There haven't been a lot of subdivisions as far as numbers in the last 10 years. So and these 2 provisions have been in existence. So we're looking at tweaking them. We're not looking at creating a whole new provision that hasn't existed. They haven't really been taken advantage of. So the regulatory changes alone don't seem like they're going to save the day per se.
I mean, the frontage, especially for single lot subdivisions, just in my experience on the planning board, the most common issue that comes before us in terms of, can I subdivide my lot is frontage. And so if we allow someone a little less frontage, if the new lot's going to be affordable, in many situations it means someone can subdivide before they couldn't, or at least before they couldn't without building a road into the lot, which somewhat ironically, creates more development than less, because while we have so much frontage, is, less.
Getting back to a point you made about that we have to be created by the state legislative body. Surely from what you hear, this is not an uncommon issue for most of the communities.
This is the short-term rentals.
Yeah, thank you. Short-term rentals. Is anybody carrying a banner on this one? It would seem to me to be one of those chip shots.
There was the Housing Coalition or the Economic Council, we had a sort of a session with many of the legislators to be, and a lot of questions, comments, and housing and short-term rentals came up quite a bit. So there's certainly talk, and I know that there's talk at the state level. I think we see it more painfully here because of the type of place that we're a resort town, and we wouldn't say Concord. But there's a very strong opposition to it. And the opposition falls into two camps. It's my property, I do what I want with my own property. New Hampshire, that is very strong sentiment. There's also, the value of profit potential, and to those that make money out of it, whether it's doing it themselves or how it adds to the saleability of property. So and there are situations where a family in Jackson might only be able to afford the mortgage on a property they bought because they can short-term rent out the accessory unit or something like that. I mean, something we looked at, if we're going to do something, is sure you can do short-term rentals so long as the property is also full-time occupied, not like the owner of a long-term rental. We're going to give that allow that work against those who just buying properties up and then putting it in.
I think that this is great political fodder for somebody that's concerned about the health of their community.
Well, that's the conversation you're talking about right now. It's the nuance of owner-occupied accessory unit versus.
And the argument against it is that eliminate short-term rental, and see property values go down because it's so much part of the market now. On the other hand, I think as things continue, more and more people looking to buy a property are going to ask, are there short-term rentals around this property I'm looking at? Because I've already had that experiences, especially with the large party house concentration. So there may be a constant reduction in property value because of short-term rentals.
The legislature is looking at it from two different angles, I think. One is sort of punitive, and one is sort of rewarding, so that they might do something so that if you have, instead of short-term rentals, if you're doing a long-term rental, you might get a tax benefit, versus penalizing people by saying, no, you can't have short-term rentals unless you're an owner or long-term tenant here, while the other places, while the short-term one adjacent to you, part of the building is being made.
So the state is working on it.
The state is looking through it, and I know Ed Butler and others were saying to us, just come up with a language you want us to propose. So if you're a lawyer or can come up with some good legal language, let us know.
There's several towns in Massachusetts that give basically a discount for any tax discount, property tax discount, any property that is full-time occupied, but it's by the owner of a long-term rental. So that has worked well. Nantucket, more recent ones. They in Massachusetts, one of those. I believe so. I'm not sure. If we were home,
In all of this, we looked at what a lot of other states are doing on short-term rentals, on two-tier tax systems, and a lot of things that just unfortunately don't have the ability to do here. Yes.
One of the things that we had discussed, and we had some really good active discussions in June when we sort of followed up. I know a few property owners, and a couple did speak up that day, that they wouldn't be able to afford to live in Jackson if they didn't actually rent out their little accessory, whatever. And that's totally different from turning a house and going away through an agency, just keep renting it out. And I think that's the real problem is the B&Bs, the Airbnbs that exist that are non-owner, there's no owner around. and they're absent, and that's where the problem arises. So some sort of, they were talking about, getting some sort of a handle on that, and that would really make all the sense.
The town can't vote.
Some towns have tried it already, and they've been, it was against the law.
The challenge.
Enforcement.
Yeah, and the problem with having been on both sides of this, the problem with, anything punitive, if you're going to charge more for something, they're just going to pass that cost on to the consumer. So that rising tide is going to sink all of us. In that case, it's just, people who are on vacation, they'll pay 10% more if everything costs 10% more. And the economics are really hard to jump through. You can make, you can make it in 5 days on the short-term rental what they can charge for a monthly rental, essentially. Those economics are really hard to get over for people who need to pay a mortgage or who want to make money. It's a tough thing.
And I'll freely admit, when I travel, I use it.
We should transparency now. All right, we have 2 other initiatives we want to provide you with an overview of. You can sit down. I know you're going to want to stand back up, but you can sit. So one of the other things that we've been pursuing is this idea of a housing trust. These are 2 examples. You probably can't read them very well from where you are, but the one on the left is Jackson Hole Community Housing Trust, and the one on the right is the Mount Desert Island Housing Trust. Just as 2 examples of existing organizations that we've looked into. What we found in working with Jackson Housing Opportunities Management Group was that the idea of a housing trust may actually create more positive change than just waiting for people to come and build some of these units. So a housing trust in this case would be a non-municipal entity, would be a non-profit entity, so it would not have to be a municipal board or depend on municipal budget. We actually, having learned a little bit about different models in different places and having had conversations at the committee level, we had an initial meeting with the Mount Washington Valley Housing Coalition, just to float the idea. Would you be open to the idea of us creating a pilot project that would be a Jackson Housing Trust that could fit within an existing nonprofit, so you don't have to create a whole other nonprofit? And we explained to them the type of initiatives that the Housing Trust might work on would be, working with willing landowners to create a type of housing unit that there's a need for. Advocating for the diversity that we've been talking about tonight. It's an early conversation. I don't know, Betsy or Scott, if you want to add anything else as far as our conversation with them so far.
Well, it's interesting. The Jackson Hole, Mount Desert Island, Mohegan Island, all these places that are somewhat similar to Jackson, is they have a draw because of the experiences recreationally and so on that you can have in those areas. And because it's fairly confined space, they all have the same kind of housing pressures that we have. And so by setting up a housing trust where we do the fundraising or land donation through the Housing Coalition in the Valley, we wouldn't need our own nonprofit organization. There are plenty of those around. But there may be people whose family grew up in Jackson, lived in Jackson or whatever, and now all the family's somewhere else, and they really don't come back. They might be interested in donating 10 acres or 30 acres or something like that, or getting it to us for a small price. So if we have some fundraising going, or land donations going, then we could maybe work with Habitat for Humanity or other organizations that might be able to help create some low-cost housing here. There may even be a parcel or 2 of town land where something like that could happen. We could get the town to basically sell the land or still retain ownership to the land, and people would just buy the homes on it. There are lots of things to talk about, and we welcome ideas.
Why does it have to be a nonprofit? Why can't it be a real estate investment trust that spins off dividends like a real estate investment?
Great, go for it. If you want to invest in it.
You know what I mean? It's clearly demand, right? That's what's driving up prices.
We've been hoping for that, but nobody's come forward yet. There are builders right in town.
The cost of housing.
Terrific.
The cost of this, the building. Exactly.
And Jackson has very high site work costs.
Yeah, we've got big boulders.
I think bringing those additional ideas forward while this is still, work in motion, maybe there are multiple initiatives. Yes.
anybody sat down to ask, what is the target that Jackson is shooting for quantitatively? Because if you're going to go into a fundraising program like this, you're competing against a lot of other entities that want to do the same thing. And, you know, typically when you go to a foundation or something, if you really demonstrate that you know that this is a town of, you know, what is it, 1,100 folks, whatever it is 800 to 900 voting folks. And the town doesn't want to become 10,000 because it would become, you would lose exactly why people are coming here. So, you know, if you decide it's 10 units or 20 or whatever the number is, then when you start doing your fundraising, you know what you're trying to achieve. But, you know, most of this discussion I've heard up to this point is numberless. And if it's numberless, it's very hard to ask yourself, which of these methods will work? What is the cost going to be? But I would really recommend that, you know, one of these steps, if it hasn't been taken, is ask that hard question. Because then it allows you to know what your target is that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think for the committee was just trying to identify first where to put their energy, and I think a lot of those things still need to be done, but if you're ready to respond.
Well, yeah, we have talked about it over the years, and that was one of the reasons, one of the conversations that we had when we set up the affordable housing ordinance that voters passed back in 2008 or 10 or whatever it was. And at that point, we were saying if we could accommodate 4 homes this year, 4 homes next year, do it a little bit at a time and just see what's needed. For example, yesterday we took in a whole lot of new voters. I'm on the checklist and was seeing a large quantity of young people who have homes that they're renting typically around here. It would be great to get some of those people staying here, but they don't have an opportunity to find lower cost housing that is really acceptable. So most of them appear to be here on more short-term times. So yeah, I think if we could work on having a situation where 4 or more people a year were being able to live here, that would be fabulous. We're not going to reach 60 people moving to Jackson in the next 5 years or something.
Yeah.
And I would just say that, Jeff, just to answer your question, you know, the government is here and they're here to help. You know, if you're a nonprofit, there are significant government offsets and subsidies that help housing trusts do it, realizing that the costs are extremely high to build affordable housing, and even in communities where building costs are not. I work with about 6 or 8 land trusts around the state, and I hear the same story, but they're also in competition for the same federal dollars, mostly through HUD, but not exclusively through HUD. And they really could do without federal assistance, which I could say state assistance, but there really isn't much.
And the Apatoka Valley Land Trust wants to work with us on, you know, if they have a landowner who has a nice parcel that would be workable for some of it going into workforce housing or something or other, they would like to participate with that, so that could be super.
All right, we have one more initiative to tell you about, and we're fortunate to have Mary Ann Jackson here to help. I'll move the slides for you.
We're going to do slides.
Yeah,
Okay.
All right, so.
And I wasn't smart to have the printout of what I said, so I'm going to have to look at my slides to talk to you. Sorry. But what I said.
You give your slides.
But I'm first going to explain what is home share. And home sharing is so unlike what the other things we've been talking about. It's taking homes that exist that you live in that have extra bedrooms, that just have extra space, that you are empty nesters, you took that workshop that you don't work in anymore, you've got extra space that can be shared. And so the difference between home share and an accessory dwelling unit is the definition of home share is it's a private bedroom, a private bathroom, and otherwise, it's your definition of what you share. So it can be you share your laundry, kitchen, garage, parking, some of the living spaces. The only requirement is that that person who's renting from you has a private bedroom and private bathroom. Now, that's not any different than what I did 30 years ago with a nanny. And that person helped out a lot and was living with me in a private space, but in a shared living environment. So one of the things about home share is that it doesn't cost any money, it doesn't have any requirements of regulations. You don't have to renovate your house, usually, maybe a door, maybe some minor modification. So that's what home share is. It's outstanding benefits to a number of the things that Steve talked about early on in terms of what are the things that people want. I was struck by how many people want to age in place, how many people still want to live in their single-family dwelling. And the interesting thing about home share is that it basically, you're creating a new family. It may be a stranger to begin with, but it ends up being somebody that you're living with in a family kind of way, because it's the same, it's just that your other family moved out and you've got someone who's moved in. So how does it help? Obviously, the homeowners have this extra space, now they can put someone in it and gain money from it, they have companionship. Seniors, and I put here anyone, because anyone at any time, including me, can have an accident and need assistance. And most of you have heard that when I broke my leg last winter, I could not have come home to be in my own house, but I live on the first floor with all the accessory, that's built for a person who's disabled. But I could not have done the kitty litter. I couldn't have fed the wood stove. I'm on a walker with, my non-weight period, but I had home share. So my science teacher made it possible for me to stay in my own home. Younger and older workers need housing, so this is a way to provide them housing without changing your neighborhood. Persons who are displaced on some, not just short-term, but even longer-term, but somewhat immediate basis, need housing and can be benefited with home share. It's a very beneficial thing to your community because you increase the density without changing the footprint or the way it looks, and you have actually increased the sense of community. Yeah. So how it works, most people are not really eager to just sort of Craigslist it and see who they get. So what the home share network that we are building, and I always say this because it's not until the 16th that the Gibson Center board will vote, and if they vote in favor of hosting this nonprofit within the Gibson, then we're ready to go. That it is it's a match. You were talking about Match.com, right? It is a way, very personalized, of interviewing the homeowners and the potential renters, doing the background checks, doing the reference checks, having the credit, the employment records, meeting people ahead of time to make sure they have the right expectations. And so, does the homeowner have the expectation that this person who might move in, maybe they can barter for a lower rent, but that person is going to do the shoveling, is going to fill the wood stove, is going to take care of the cats, is going to do the landscaping. Well, then what's the expectation, and there are standards, for how much rent do you reduce because that person's going to do some of those services. I can tell you my science teacher didn't pay rent in January. He did a lot of work for me. So the concept of the network is all over the country. We are not doing something brand new. We are replicating a model that's been going on in Vermont through, if you want to look, there's a Vermont home share that's been active for 35 years. It's got spin-offs in Vermont. We are modeling ourselves off the one in San Luis Obispo, only because we like a little bit more of the way they've written their agreements. All of this is done following New Hampshire tenancy regulations and laws. We are not the renters or rental agency, so that the legal responsibility and all the agreements are between the homeowner and the renter. I will tell you that New Hampshire law protects homeowners in a very protective way when you're talking about a home share situation. The law is very different than what you think of with regular apartments, separate unit. Evictions can happen like that and for almost no reason. In other words, the homeowner is highly protected in a shared situation. Okay. Yeah. So I just sort of just want to tell you again, I think that the advantages are multiple and very applicable to a community like this, where we've got the kind of housing stock and the kind of aged population. This provides extra income and some property tax mitigation, companionship and fun. I have had my kids are the ones who added it up for me, that I've had over 18 people who've lived in my house over the years for various reasons, include all the ones, somebody who's divorced or displaced, somebody whose house burned down, just various people, because I've always had houses that were too big. So the potential is there for the barter kinds of services. This is distributive, affordable housing. This isn't packing people into a multi-unit, 4-story thing. This is just, you don't even know it's there. So environmentally, it's incredibly beneficial because now you're all sharing that heating and those utilities in that space, not multiple units. Senior independent living is how many people can have a caregiver who they otherwise can't even find. They certainly, that person who's on a CNA wages can't afford to live here. But if you can provide housing for someone like that, then you've solved a couple problems. Preservation of neighborhoods and protection of your property. So home sharing, a lot of times you can be the person who's traveling and gone for multiple months out of the year, but there's somebody who's home watching and carrying it on for your property. So that we are, like I say, I can't do a thing until I know that I have my umbrella organization, give me the green light. But if I get that, then there's a really good chance we'll be up and running, starting to do some interviews and matches by January or February.
I just thought to clarify that, I don't know if everyone knows who you are, but a member, Marion's on the board of directors for the Gibson Senior Center. Everybody, yeah, so that's what you're talking about, the Gibson Senior Center in North College. Just another piece, that this would be managed by Gibson Center staff. You said that they would come in. Is it separate?
So it's volunteer to begin with. And so we how many matches will we do? I mean, even if you look at San Luis Obispo and many of these others, they're excited when they do 10 a year. And we're talking about the whole Mount Washington Valley. But then once it takes off, it can be 50. To begin with, it's I'm doing a lot of sort of interviews and talking to people and the background checks, and I will learn it. And then when we get to, and there's an application fee for the homeowner and the renter. It doesn't pay for all of it, so we will have to do fundraising. But the expenses at this point are very, very low because there is no staff, right? But the projection is that within a year or two, if we start doing enough volume, that we would have paid staff who would be employees at the Gibson Center. This will be a department of the Gibson Center.
And you already have a model out there that you're kind of...
Lots of them, but
In January was, I mean, it depends on the meeting, but that's kind of kick off January 2019.
I'm impatient. I mean, we've done the work of talking to the lawyers and the accountants and the insurance people, and so it's a matter of my getting the actual go-ahead to go get the training in terms of, background checks or background checks, and just start. So we have to come up with the marketing plan and the funding and if anybody's I'm looking forward to the sign up because I will need a little bit of help.
Hi, I'm Kate. My husband and I were from House Erie when we lived with our family, and we employed 15 people year-round full-time. And this I didn't know about this part of the conversation, and for me, this is suddenly the most exciting part. We're a little unique, and because our property is everything we have, and our children live there, we take our hiring and our team incredibly seriously, and so you don't ever get to forget your integrity when you come to work. And so I have 15 people, one of which lives in Jackson, many of which would love to, who are exceptional candidates for this kind of thing, and who come with really glowing recommendations from our family to other families, and would be just the kind of people who would make this kind of program really successful.
So,
It's
yeah,
awesome.
I want to just really amplify what you're saying. I mean, this is not the answer to every problem, but it's an answer to some. So I'm not worried about doing the people who shared my home, and I'm just as an individual, if they were good enough that Summit Achievement was going to hire Eric as a science teacher, I'm okay there. You know, that I don't need to worry about. Same thing now, I have a young woman who's just moved into the house that Betsy Donovan down at Mountain Center Physical Therapy hired. That's all I need. So, that if Kate said, this person's reliable and really, good enough for you, that's probably somebody who's going to be okay in your house.
It's really cool.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a number of businesses in town who are saying, we could vouch, we've got a great person, and so that's kind of that added reference that could be added.
How does that address we want to renew our community with young families? I heard singular a lot as one science teacher. That's not a family of 1.3.
Right, very dependent on the home that you have. Mine doesn't really lend itself to more than a couple. You know, they could share the space. It's a one-bedroom, space. So it's totally dependent on what is the space. There are people with the big, the Victorian or the old colonial, where they are now living just on the first floor, and they could certainly house or offer to share with a larger family. That there's nothing that precludes that being more than singular.
But that is the hardest nut. Right? For that, and that's where maybe trust is what really fits that.
Right.
And I think what Mary Ann's talking about is that black housing more so for the individual, something that need for that in Jackson. It's unlikely that Jackson's ever going to put up a giant apartment building to serve that need. But also, Jackson really doesn't have any senior housing either. Like we're losing, that in the population as well. Something like this, sort of go back to the 2A. So then, we need to focus on that middle part.
And it doesn't solve the problem for the young person who wants their own home, but at least it can get them here and started. It also frees up some of the homes that you do have because some of your people are in the Yeah.
In your experience and personally doing this and the research you've done, how long are these relationships typically? Are we talking about a 3-month stay, a 6-month, a year lease, multiple years? Does this person become a part of that community in the experience, in the research phase?
In my experience, it has depended totally on what this person's need. Was it an emergency and they needed to stay for 6 weeks until they could get something sorted out? And I've had people who lived there for 4 years. I know that Vermont, or one of the sites, has listed what the average length, I think it's the Vermont, but it's long. It's a year, it's 2, it's intended to be like a long-term.
Here in Jackson, we had a perfect example of that when Nancy Freeman was alive. She had a number of younger people that actually rented rooms from her. She was perfect for a long time. And my brother, for one, lived with her for, I think, 16 years. And then he moved in with another fellow, and that situation changed. And just recently, through another woman, he's now living with an older woman. And she is delighted. Her family is beside themselves that she's able to stay in her home, and she knows that she's not going to have to worry about anything. So it's just, in his case, and that there are a lot of young people that are working in this valley that could do exactly the same thing.
Well, I think Sally and Steve
They got a job.
They
They go
have
to the
this
job
straight.
every day.
Oh, yeah.
It's been nothing yet, or it's strange.
Yeah, you know, but the Swensons had all kinds of people live with them.
Yeah, some were just long-term and some weren't.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest barrier is the fear, you know, that somebody, once that they're into it, they go, oh, well, I love Jeremy, but they don't want to rent to somebody they don't know. And so then it turns out that I can help them become comfortable with who this person is. And I just can't say enough about what Kate said, is that, you know, if they've already been hired and have that kind of stability already checked out, you know, that then people can feel a lot more comfortable, and my job is just to get them matched.
Okay, I'm watching the time. I know that some of you are going to leave to go to the other event. So just wanted to open it up to any additional comments and questions in the back.
Did any of the businesses, you know, any of the larger businesses, Eagle Mountain House, Christmas Farm Inn, talk about the potential of employee housing that they in fact would do? And would there be any potential of incentivizing any of these businesses to have, you know, employee rental housing either on site or maybe a separate site from the actual business?
I mean, some do end up having to do it because that's the only way that they can have staff. You know, in general, if you're giving them a room to have staff, you're probably giving them some income on that room. And there is, you know, it's beyond just hotels. There are some discussions, and that there's to say, if you're going to put in a new business of any type, you also got to bring in some component of housing that, you know, the staff that your business is going to require. Speaking as a business owner, the last thing I want to add to my plate is being a landlord. my day is already, you know, complicated enough, and so trying to marry housing and business development can be tricky because most business people are not looking to also be a landlord at the same time. But in certain cases, you really have no choice. If you want to staff your business, you need somehow to buy housing.
We did ask them about that, and there were a few that said, in an emergency, we can have somebody who lives in Gorham or Brownfield stay overnight, but that wasn't something that they could normally work on, just not capable of doing it.
I think also that if we're looking at adding housing to Jackson to maintain and build the town community, I don't know when the last time you lived in employee housing is. It's not really like a friendly, I want to live here for the rest of my life kind of situation. So if we're looking for including more housing in town, and having employee housing is important, but it's also important to have, you know, employee housing is important. If you have employee housing, I think we're looking to have homes.
One of the things that we thought of before, and I really would love to get the names of people that do have, and this is sort of like a little answer to the small family, is the condos that have lockouts, which is an extra facility. And a lot of these are vacation homes that don't have anybody in them, and it would almost be matched with the right small family, a way for them not to have to worry about their property when they're only coming out for the winter ski or what have you. And I think we have a few of those.
Part of it is getting people aware of it. Emails and so on could be very helpful, maybe.
Other comments and questions?
I'm going to come up with a suggestion, and I should probably get ready to run. As it relates to the housing trust and funding, and let's face it, funding is going to become an important issue however you go about it. Would anybody in town advocate for, and I'm modeling this to a degree in a somewhat different way from Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, that have a land bank? there's a 2% tax on all real estate sales that go to the land bank. In this case, instead of money going to open land, the money in Jackson would go to the housing trust. And there would be some 1%, 1.5%, 2%, some quote-unquote tax put on all property sales that is paid by the buyer that would go to the housing trust. It would at least be some monies that would be there for use for affordable housing, working with Habitat for Humanity, whatever. And was that ever thought of, discussed? I mean, I realize added taxes right away sort of lose interest pretty quick. But there
Yeah,
are,
it's in the purchase price, so let the buyer beware and pay whatever the market's going to bear.
Wasn't it San Francisco that just went that in?
I was going to say, I think San Francisco was looking at doing the same. So there are other models that have.
Well, and the state gets its slice of the pie on every real estate transfer tax anyway.
Right.
Might as well, you know, why don't you keep some of it local? I mean, this area we get creamed. We pay so much more into the state's coffers through rooms and meals than we get back in services. It'd be nice to at least have a little self-determination and say, yeah, let's keep some of our tax dollars local.
It'd be nice to know how much that is that you're talking about. You know, come up with a mill rate based on what you know is the total transactional value for the town. Look at that number and say, let's just put 1% on that, 2% on that. What's that mean? Is that meaningful?
Realtors could probably just take the sales data in the last couple of years and come up with a pretty concrete number fairly easily.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think it would be a difficult thing to look at and to quantitate pretty easily.
What was your comment, Scott?
Well, I was just questioning whether that would also require some sort of city authority.
I don't know. The Jackson Housing Matters, Opportunities Matters Committee has not shied away from any innovative ideas. And I think the fact that there's still innovative ideas like the one you're proposing coming out that need to be investigated further, it shows that there are going to be a lot of different ways that you approach this issue.
I mean, in Massachusetts, it actually is in fact approved at the state level for these two different land banks, and it has been tried in other communities and in fact turned down.
And turned down by
The town.
the
Local people.
Okay.
There was a proposal years ago to do it all Cape Cod, and that got turned down. The real estate lobbying group was very aggressive in turning it down. The real estate group said that that's going to end house sales with that added tax.
And the real estate lobby will also, vigorously oppose any short-term rental restraints as well. Until the tide turns, if people stop buying property because there are short-term rentals next door. One thing any housing trust in Jackson, New Hampshire is going to have to be pretty creative. Look at Jackson Whole Housing Trust, and their ability to get cash donations is far greater than ours will ever be. I mean, the overall wealth in Jackson Hole, the median property value is $1 million. It's a different scale in Jackson, New Hampshire. So, things like that we should certainly look into, because anywhere we're going to dig up some money, we're going to want to do that. But I think land donations and then some kind of grants that we could get, that's where the bulk of what we have to work with comes from. I assume. One thing that Jackson Hole does that I think is really nice is that for those that are getting properties, it's a lottery system, and the lottery is based on, somewhat based on a score, and what goes into the score is the number of years that you've already been in that community, sort of proving yourself as a member of the community, what you do for a job and how that adds to the community. And then, your intent to remain in the community and your future plans. So, again, they're really looking at it as much about preserving and building the community as it is about simply providing housing for those that need it. So it's that community perspective on the whole issue that I think is sort of what we want to go after as well.
I think do you have still a comment?
Well, just a comment about, I think, as I see it, a big problem is certainly the short-term rentals. And I've thought about, could you tax them? The people, so much a night per person who stays there, some money comes off and gets paid to the town. Because a lot of houses are being bought specifically for short-term rentals. So maybe you go after that and tax people who are buying things for that kind of incentive as a business. Or a per night, like hotels are paying rooms and meals tax. And VRBO, they have their own, they have to pay taxes to the state. But what about the town looking? We were.
That's clear and obvious.
Yeah, because that's your problem. Like the problem is if you didn't have all these people renting short term, you'd have a lot more housing and a lot more housing.
And it's a problem for the businesses, the Snowflake, the Eagle, places like that, they're trying to fill their homes. Their businesses with guests, paying guests. And now if they're going to Airbnbs, that's a double whammy, because they can't have their employees and they're not getting the income from guests.
And that has definitely happened.
And if they're
There was a
making,
time where we had the big, the January 30K or whatever it was. No, I guess it was
NCAA's.
the NCAA's, where we had students coming from all over, and area businesses had been told to plan on filling your hotels or whatever with these skiers and families, and it turned out they were all in Airbnbs around. And so that was a really a whammy for our business.
They did go to.
Well, they don't have
Why isn't this an article that we're voting on in?
That's what we want it to be. We'd like it to be.
It seems so obvious.
But we're hemmed in a little bit by the state at this point in what we're allowed to request.
How
So we're
much?
working on that. Well,
We
for
can ask
example,
for it, but we can't.
we'd like to have a regulation where if you've got more than 5 people staying in a home, then you have to meet the requirements for safety code. Just
Why
like a
don't you
hotel.
start with the opening you have, which is a rooms tax?
But we don't have that availability.
Airbnb does charge, tax, and that is automatic.
it goes to the state, but what about if it comes to the town? Like something comes to our town?
The Airbnb thing is also a joke, because the people that are staying in Airbnb will tell you, and I see them regularly, especially since they closed down Christmas Mountain. It's not timeshare anymore, it's all of a sudden VRBO on Airbnb. It's hundreds of them up there. They laugh when I quiz everybody because it's affecting me directly. I quiz everyone. I haven't had an assistant since June 4th because I can't house the people that want to come up here to work for me. So it is a big problem. Leslie, who met with your committee, spent 6 months trying to find a place for her and 2 high school kids. Excellent employees. I can't vouch that my amazing employees are going to be great in somebody's house. I have qualms about that. They're amazing for me. I gotta know what they're like at home. And I've got qualms about that. I know that some of my staff would not want to live with someone else. They would make a house together. They would want to bring their families here. But if you discuss with the people that are staying at Airbnb, or if you even discuss the Airbnbers on a heart-to-heart, fun-loving conversation, it's a big joke paying rooms and meals. Because the second they get that name and number, they don't ever have to go back through Airbnb. They don't have to pay the percent to Airbnb. And they don't have to pay the rooms and meals because now they are friends. And it's done all the time. And it's a huge circle, and this is nationwide. We've got family in Florida, tight with real estate, Colorado, Tahoe. It's a big subject, obviously, everywhere. But the joke is that they're using realtors that have got the inside track before anything goes on the market. They pick them up. They've got a hook. They've got a customer that loves the place. They sell them without paying a real estate commission. They screwed the realtor out of that. They screwed the state out of their rooms and meals. They screwed the town out of their municipal facilities. It takes more fire, more police calls. Neighbors can't call and say, hey, your kid's having a party next door. Cars are parked in front of my yard because they don't know who's next door anymore. And that they're not going to call. So now you've used up your municipal things. This is letting a few people with deep pockets from out of state come in and buy everything that comes on the market in Bartlett and Jackson is obnoxious. And the fact that we haven't noticed it or that it got by so deep scares me to death, because my kids loved, my son, my grandson loved Jackson School, and as our kids grow up, Their young families, where are they going to go? They can't go in. People that belong to my gym rave about their opportunities. They don't rent their places. They don't rent them even seasonally. It's all Airbnb or VRBO. And that's a dozen of just my members that I know of houses that used to be rentals that are no longer. So this is serious. It's not fool around, dibble around. It's not let's have more commissions and more meetings and more talking and more discussion and wait for the state. This is a very serious problem. And it's not just the hotels that are losing money on it, because frankly, I'm making money because they're getting horrified by what they're finding when they get up here, and then they're coming to find a hotel. That's great. But the idea that they were horrified at what they found scares me, because if they left town and they didn't go to a Jackson hotel, then it gives Jackson a black eye. So it's hurting the school, it's hurting the Sunday school, it's hurting the staff situation is completely and utterly ridiculous. And if you go to the number Sandra from the Christmas Farm Inn, had no idea what Christmas Mountain was doing. And the only reason I did is because people were coming down looking for rooms. She got on while we were on the phone and was stunned at how many are there, starting at Christmas Mountain, Bartlett, Jackson. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of accommodations that were family accommodations, where our families with their children going to our school were moving into as our children got older and moved out. And we aren't going to have that. We are not going to have that. I know personally someone who owns several places here and buying the second it comes as a whiff in a restaurant over breakfast. It's gone. They're going to sell.
You're touching on so many of the things we heard at the forum, through the interviews, through the survey, and then earlier tonight. And it's clearly something that is not going to go away here in Jackson, and hopefully we do get some resolution and direction from the legislature so that you can start to talk about how you'd like to handle it here. So thanks for sharing.
Certainly contact our legislators.
Who's driving? Who's driving the legislature? Who's carrying the van?
We're not sure. It's listed on the legislative website as a study committee, and we inquired and didn't get any update. But I think now that we're past the election, we'll hear more about it.
And I know Jack Ed Butler was very interested in it, especially the short-term rental situations.
Ed Butler was instrumental in making sure that the Airbnb
I would say he's your
paid the
legislative
rooms and meals tax, which in some ways it made it very easy.
We need to wrap up a bill that she has a chance of getting it.
We need to wrap it up. I'm sure you guys have plenty of opinions and ideas. There's a sign-up sheet over there to say you're most interested in X, Y, or Z. Please give us some feedback. Let us know how to reach you, etc. Volunteer to join the planning board. Participate in other things to make housing work well.
This is a great group to come out. You're clearly passionate about it, and you see different opportunities. So thank you.
The chairs, they can just be left.